Good morning, rather. And thank you very much for making the time to join us today to listen to the incredible results of the research that has been done by Tales of Toning. But I thought, let me start by giving just a short introduction for those of you who haven't been on any one of our webinars or in our group that is organizing this national campaign to end gender-based violence by 2030. We've been very modest because we're saying we want to reduce it, but really the intention is to end it, perhaps not by 2030, but to sort of work towards that. So the purpose of today is also partly we wanted to do a very, very soft launch of the campaign during the 16 days. And in that regard, we felt doing some awareness raising or just giving people a sense of what is being done on the ground would be a good way of starting off the campaign. Really, the intention is for this campaign to start now and continue for the next 5 years, because what we've seen in South Africa is that there have been many organizations that have responded to the GBV challenge by setting up institutions, whether they're NGOs or CBOs, that come in at the end of the violation of a human being or a woman or a man for that matter. But there's very little that one witnesses about preventing the violence from happening in the first place. And so this is a prevention initiative. And the idea is that we enlist all of South Africa to be part of this campaign. Literally all 9 provinces, all institutions in government, in civil society, in business. I personally, I'm on the board of the national, the National Fund to end GBV. The fund was set up by the president 3 years ago, and its life has been extended for another 3 years, certainly. We decided at the fund that we needed to do something to respond to the lack of prevention strategies in the country. The fund is small. It's a small organization. It doesn't have a lot of money, but all the money it does have has been given by the private sector largely. About 60–70% of its funds come from the private sector. So the private sector, we have chosen for it to be an important partner in this campaign. The Global Compact is also part of our team. The United Nations Global Compact is different from most of the UN. Its focus is not on with the government. It has relationships with the government, but its focus is the private sector. And it has quite a number of private sector members, and their work really is to promote human rights in business. And they have a program on gender-based violence and gender equality as well, which is why the 2 of them from the private sector have been invited to participate in this. And we wanted the private sector to be central because they have resources, not just money. We're not going to them with a begging bowl now. We are inviting them to participate through a business-to-business approach where they will use their resources and their own gender-related programs to plug the campaign into that. So that's in a nutshell. And lastly, but not least by any means, we've invited SAWID, the South African Women in Dialogue, to also be a driver group in making this campaign real. SAWID is 25 years old. It's run very well. It's women across the country who are volunteers. Their main focus is responding to the crisis of poverty in the country, but they also do it it's a cross-cutting issue across race and gender and all sorts of other marginalized issues that plague our country and people as well. So SAWID is well run, as I say. It had to be part of this campaign because it has the status and it has the experience and it has the people as well. And then there are other the Violent Prevention Forum is a large organization as well. It is a forum, but inside of the forum, I think the last forum I attended with 30 institutions that were there, and all of them are doing amazing work, including Tales of Turning, which is also a member of the forum. And so they will also be an important partner. So that's just by way of introduction. And if you're interested in getting more background information, I'm very happy to send it to everybody. I'll leave it at there and give back to Jenna Lee, and she will then start with her presentation. Thank you, Jenna Lee.
Thank you so much, Nozipho. It's a great honor to speak with you today, to be here with you all today. And thank you so much for introducing the national campaign and giving the background. It's a very exciting initiative with so many incredible organizations and people already involved. So it's very inspiring. So I'm going to talk to you a bit more about Tales of Turning and the social media listening research that we've done. Can you hear me now?
Your voice is gone. The sound has just disappeared.
No, we can hear her
I don't know why.
on my side.
Yeah, I can hear her as well.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So I'm going to tell you a bit more about the social media listening research and how these insights can be useful to the national campaign. So Tales of Turning uses a deep understanding of people from psychology, and the other two directors are Jeffrey Mamputa and Stefan Snau, who are really experienced conflict mediators. So we take that deep understanding of people and combine it with technology and social media to reach people at scale and increase the impact of the work that we're doing. We work in areas such as child online safety, preventing mis and disinformation and hate speech during elections, gender-based violence, and technology-facilitated gender-based violence. So we take a narrative therapy approach where individuals and communities are viewed as the experts of their own lives with the skills and knowledge to influence their problems. So we facilitated processes where individuals and communities share their knowledge to create new narratives that we can then amplify through social media and technology. And this is really important for the social media listening, as this is a way of deeply listening to thousands and thousands of people across South Africa. These are the tools that marketing companies traditionally use, and they pull data from public social media that we can then analyze. And working with this big data allows us to see how people are talking about these issues. So we work in all the different South African languages, but it also helps us see the colloquial language that people are using. So instead of using, when we're developing campaigns and messaging and dialogue, instead of using language that is not relatable to people, we can really find the terms that meet them where they're at. So we're really finding ways to make this relatable to people. It also allows us to do a thematic analysis. So we look at the big data and see what themes are emerging. So what are the key issues that people are facing? How are they grappling with these issues around gender norms and gender-based violence? And how are they talking about this? What's also interesting is it gives us near real-time insight into the conversation. And we can see how the conversation shifts over time. So it's really useful for doing a baseline to see how campaigns, interventions, and dialogues are shifting this narrative over time. And we can see spikes in the conversation. So we can see when campaigns and interventions are getting people talking and what's getting people's attention. We can also see geographical hotspots. So we can see geographical hotspots of gender-based violence and misogyny where we need to do targeted interventions. Another thing that I'll go into a bit later, these social media listening tools also allow us to find thousands and thousands of allies. So men that are speaking out against gender-based violence and misogyny. So in the past, we've found 75,000 male allies online that have spoken out against this. And then we can then share resources with them to help them take action and prevent gender-based violence and misogyny. So recently we did social media listening research into gender norms amongst youth in South Africa, and particularly the Western Cape. And we're just now going to share a few of those insights. We will share the full study after the webinar, so everyone has a copy. But some of the insights I'll share now, and then you can see how this can be developed into messaging. So for the social media listening research, how we do it is that we start by finding keywords. So here are some examples of keywords. We use the different South African languages. To find the keywords, we use our subject matter expertise, literature reviews, and we also have a team of dialogue facilitators who are actually online on social media, facilitating dialogues into this narrative around gender norms and gender-based violence and femicide, and collecting keywords at the same time. So you can really see how we use also colloquial language when we're doing this. So it's really to see how people are speaking. And then once we've had, so for this study, we had 600 keywords that we collected. We then test them and see the data that's coming up. And we work with a reference group to then discuss that data and make sure we're getting really good quality data. And we narrowed it down to 160 keywords. So then we pull up thousands and thousands of social media posts in this narrative. And we did a thematic analysis on it. So we had over 33,000 pieces of data or conversations that we were then analyzing, and we wrote it up into a report. So these were the key themes that were emerged. So they are the ones with the most conversation and the most data. And the first one, I'll just share some of the insights with you, were around social norms and stereotypes about women and girls. There was a lot of reference to hatred towards women. And a lot of this was from internalized misogyny, so women hating other women. And this was also expressed, you can see the colloquial language being used around mean girl energy, so women and girls being derogatory towards other women and girls. There was also a trend around fear women, which was prevalent in these discussions. And a lot of this was taking a picture of a case of a woman being violent and saying this is why we should fear women. So this was something that emerged during the research, that there was quite a high conversation around this. Then there was also conversations around the social expectations that are placed on women, and how that there's backlash. So when women don't conform to these pressures that are placed on them, they face backlash to try and get them to conform to those behaviors. There was a very interesting conversation around women and sexuality. And here the double standards between men and women were very apparent. So there's conversation around body count, which is the number of sexual partners a woman has had. In relation to women, if a woman was perceived to have a high body count, they were labeled as a low value woman. So also talking about what makes a woman valuable, what makes her wife material. So if she had a high body count, a lot of people would say she doesn't have value. She's only valuable as an entertainment or as a side chick. And side chick means when a man has more than one girlfriend. And again, in that side chick conversation, the blame was placed on women rather than, and it was seen as normal just for men to have more than one partner. And this also leads to the conversations about body shaming and shaming women for their sexuality. And this discourse really amounted to hate speech against women. And the discussions on body shaming really intersected with, so there's a lot of intersectionality across the conversation between race, xenophobia, bullying. It's really prevalent online. And these conversations also talked about this expectation to live up to Western beauty standards and the intersectionality between that and racism, and how women were also victim blamed when they shared a photo of themselves online and they were body shamed. Many people even commented that they shouldn't be sharing photos online because of the way they looked. So I'll talk a bit now about the social norms and stereotypes about men and boys. This was really an interesting conversation around real men, and then also a conversation around indoda must, which means men must. And these are the expectations put on men, emphasizing certain traits such as strength, leadership, dominance, and the ability to provide. There was also women's frustrations with men, so talking about hate men or men are trash. And again, the double standards in relationships were evident. So the other authors on social media also called out this indoda must and real must narrative and the stereotypes, calling for men to display increased emotional intelligence and embrace their vulnerability, and also celebrating men who display these traits. Other people, and there was a lot of conversation around this, raising the concerns around the socializations of boys, the mental health issues these pressures create, and also talking about the intergenerational cycles of trauma and violence. Another interesting conversation was around gender-based violence, emotional and psychological abuse, bullying. Again, in the conversation around bullying, the concept of mean girl energy came up, where it's women bullying other women. And then online abuse and cyberbullying, which is a rapidly evolving crisis as technology is advancing so quickly. There are more and more ways to abuse women online. And in this conversation, it was particularly related to revenge porn and cyberbullying. The other interesting conversation was around male aggression and violence. So there is also discussing how many men hurt other men and how much violence men perpetrate on boys as well as other men, and that male on male violence. I'll now hand over to Sipiwe, who's going to talk about the theme of culture and tradition.
Thank you, Jenna-Lee, and good morning, everyone. I'm really honored to be talking through some of the other insights that we got during our social media listening. And to start off, I'll be touching on culture, tradition, and what people think gender roles should look like today. So we saw a lot of mentions of lobola, polygamy, and the trad wife concept. Next slide. All right, so starting off with lobola, we saw a lot of discussions that were around this, and they were very intense, but also very late. And what we found is that a lot of people still genuinely support the practice of lobola. For them, it's cultural, it's meaningful, it's a symbol of respect, and also like a way to create unions. But right next to that, we also saw another wave of posts and conversations where people were now pushing back against the tradition, saying that it didn't feel the same as it did before, or now it has lost like its original meaning. So many mentions talked about how the practice has become distorted and in a way almost commercialized. because it's now viewed as a man buying a wife or a family selling their daughter. And with attaching this commercialization, it could lead to feelings of entitlement from the man or feelings as if he owns his wife, which could later on lead to cases of abuse. So there are also conversations around the process of lobola, so men needing to save up, with some even taking out loans in order to support lobola, which then fed into that question of whether lobola is still about union or it's becoming more of a financial action, which also led to possible feelings of resentment if the man struggled to come up with that money, and then feelings of control and ownership of his wife, which, as I said, would later lead on to possible cases of abuse. And then we also saw the gendered side of it. That is some conversations that were stating how a woman's value in the process of lobola changes depending on things like whether she's a virgin, whether she already has children, what her count is, and it became a way to sort of disrespect some women or consider them as less valuable, which also feeds into harmful gender stereotypes as well. So we saw that these harmful stereotypes are becoming or are deeply rooted within the tradition of lobola, and the conversations show up quite a bit in digital spaces. And then shifting on to the trad wife narrative, it's a new age concept, which gained a lot of traction from influencers who glamorize an aesthetic of a perfect stay-at-home wife in terms of how they look, how they talk, cooking things from scratch, taking care of their children and all of that. So we saw a lot of posts around it and a lot of mentions of other women or young girls who are expressing that they also want to be a trad wife in the future. However, what was interesting is that there were also people who commented saying that keep in mind that her husband is probably a wealthy or influential man in order for her to be a trad wife, which shows that there's now an expectation that's also put on men to be wealthy and to be providers in order for the women to be trad wives. So we saw that some rejected the concept because they felt that it reinforces outdated gender stereotypes. And beneath the surface, we also saw that the matter of agency came into play. So that's women's choice. So comments such as, if I choose to stay at home, then it's fine, but it should be the woman's choice. It shouldn't be an expectation from the man or from society. So what we saw there is sort of tensions around tradition and what would now be autonomy from the women's side, and more aspirations in relation to cultural expectations as well. And then moving on to the concept of transactional relationships, or the theme of transactional relationships, we saw what came up again and again was the conversation around sugar daddies or blessers. And what was quite interesting and what stood out was the sort of normalization of this, with some users even specifically mentioning that they are looking for a blesser, and it was very casual, as if it's a normal part of dating now. But we see that underneath the surface, there's more of a darker reality, because mentions talked about how it's usually older men target really young girls because they believe that these younger girls have expectations of them. They're a lot more easier to manipulate and also have lower body count. So we see that power imbalance very clearly, because men use their money to control these young girls' choices and even push for unprotected sex, which then could lead to teenage pregnancies or unwanted pregnancies, which they then later on do not take responsibility for. So when we talk about exploitation, this is where it shows up, especially for the younger girls who carry most of the risk when it comes to these relationships. And then something else that we also picked up was the double standards around it. In cases where an older woman is dating a much younger man, also considered a Ben 10, people don't take it as seriously. They treat it as a joke or even praise the man. But when it's a younger woman who is with a blesser or sugar daddy, she's judged quite harshly. Her character is attacked. She's labeled a gold digger. We see the shaming as well, even saying that probably she's comes from maybe a single mother household, which we'll also talk about later on. So these conversations reveal that behind this sort of glamorized image of a soft life, see like systems of coercion, manipulation, and unequal power dynamics. So there's a need to target the system of these economic pressures and gender norms, and also the silence that is the exploitation, because that's what keeps the cycle going. Thank you very much. I'll hand it over to Jenna Lee again.
Thank you so much. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of the last themes, because then I want to get onto the messaging and how we actually use this. So there was a lot of conversation around absentee fathers, and also the judgment that goes onto children who have absent fathers. And then a really shocking finding was hatred towards single mothers. And there was a significant volume in this conversation, and it bordered on hate speech, where people were blaming single mothers, saying that they are the cause of gender-based violence and crime in South Africa, and don't date a single mother because they have too much trauma. And this discourse really promotes harmful stereotypes and has far-reaching consequences for women who are working hard to support and take care of their children, and far-reaching consequences for the children themselves. Mental health is a very important part of the conversation around gender norms and gender-based violence. And here the conversation was looking at the impact of trauma on men, women, and children, the need for healing, and the intergenerational cycles of trauma. And they also spoke around the mental health challenges that men face, and that men, because of the masculine and gender norm stereotypes, that it's hard for them to seek out and access mental health support, which has far-reaching consequences if they are survivors of violence, but also perpetrators need healing. And if there's barriers to men reaching out, it makes it even harder for perpetrators to get the healing they need to get out of these harmful, violent patterns. And so I'm going to go over to now the messaging. So as you can see, this gives us really, really rich data into how are people talking, how are they thinking, and really into the underlying issues of what are the underlying issues of gender-based violence. It is such a complex issue that really needs this approach of looking what are the driving causes underneath it and how we can address it. So we've had 3 brainstorming sessions about how can we take these insights and develop them into messaging. So some of them are around strong hands don't hurt, they care, and reframing masculine aggression from violence to caring. And really having honest conversations about what a strong man does when he is angry, and choosing healing rather than taking this hurt and pain out on the other people in his life. Also showing that gender-based violence and mental health have deeper roots beyond what is visible. So really looking at the iceberg model of what we see on the surface, the violent behavior is only a small part of the whole story. The drivers underneath are about beliefs, identities, pressures, emotional realities, and how can we address that and get people to reflect on all these driving factors. Also, stop qualifying men or anyone's violence as courage and clearly naming it as violence. And the single mother narrative, I think, is really a very problematic and hurtful narrative. So taking the opportunity to celebrate single mothers and highlight their strength and resilience. So these are just a few of the ideas that can be taken from those messages. And obviously it requires a lot more workshopping and engagements. What we use when we're developing messaging is hope-based narratives. So instead of only focusing on the problem, we co-create a vision of the world that we want to see, moving from fear to hope, using positive imagery and avoiding harmful stereotypes, shifting from what we're against to what we're for, and moving from the problem to the solution. And we do this through focusing on shared values, listening to find common ground, inclusive. So what the social media listening research, and then also working with reference groups is a way to include diverse perspectives and experiences, really focusing on local language and imagery that's very relatable to people. And through the social media listening research, we can also find key influences in the conversations, and then emphasize the solution and the action steps we need to take to get there. So on the screen is an example of how we use the social media listening research insights, as well as the hope-based narratives to create messaging. So you can see, instead of showing a man being violent to his child and saying stop violence, we show the positive interactions that we actually want to see. And through having this imagery, you start creating new neural pathways of this is the solution, and these are the action steps that we want to see to get to the solution. And then we use messaging that promotes dialogue. So this message is around an insight around the intergenerational cycles of trauma and violence. So there were, in previous research we did, we found that there were quite a lot of men online talking about how they were afraid of they had violent fathers, and how they were afraid of passing that on to their children. And so we created this design. Instead of saying to men, don't be violent to your children, giving them a question to reflect on and asking them what they are afraid of. So what we do, we use the insights to create this social media content. And then we've also developed digital dialogue facilitation methodology. So we actually go online. So one of the key findings on this research is that there's so much social media conversation online around TV shows, campaigns, podcasts, radio programs around gender norms and around the characters in these shows or the podcasts and around gender-based violence. So an amazing way to increase the impact of campaigns and edutainment content and all of this is to actually go online and be involved in those conversations. And it's exactly like you would do in-person dialogue. We make people feel understood and heard, and ask them curious questions to get them to reflect back on harmful beliefs. So say someone posted on social media, women belong in the kitchen. We would actually go and engage with those posts and say, what makes you believe this? What's led you to have this belief? And then carry on the conversation and get them to see that this is a socialized belief that they need to reflect on, and that there are other ways to do this. What's also important on this is that in the conversation around gender-based violence, there is a lot of backlash and mis and disinformation. Often this is even coordinated networks. So we have developed a methodology and done 3 studies with the University of Washington and University of Zurich to show that this prevents the resharing of mis and disinformation, people trusting its accuracy and believing in it. And it reduces people resharing mis and disinformation by 82%. So this is really important to be able to have the deeper dialogues around these issues, is to neutralize the mis and disinformation in this space. And what we do is we've been training peer educators, university students, community-based organizations, taxi drivers to use this methodology, both online and offline, to increase the impact of the work they're doing on the ground. And so we are creating these networks of digital change makers who are doing this work and promoting this work and facilitating dialogues in their communities and offline. And this really increases the impact of campaigns. And as also I mentioned earlier, with the social media listening tools, we can find thousands and thousands of allies online that we then share the social media content with for them to reshare. We send them tools on how to do this dialogue facilitation, so how to have conversations with other men when the conversations are misogynistic, and these different root causes, like encourage their friends to reach out for healing and all of this. So it really becomes a comprehensive thing that we can then track using social media listening tools. And if there are spikes in gender-based violence or misogyny or attacks on women online, we also mobilize this network of volunteer digital change makers to take action and to address these issues online. So that brings me to the end of the presentation, and I'm just wondering if anyone has any questions or comments.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Isiabata, are you going to facilitate the Q&A? I'm sure there's very many questions. People, please use your icons. Raise your hand if you wish to say something, ask a question or make a comment or share an experience, or yeah, it's open.
I think Siki Langa muted herself.
Okay.
Hi.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentation. I loved the presentation. Thank you so much for your analysis. I was wondering, do you have any plans on, because I'm just thinking of how to integrate this particular strategy with other organizations beyond your particular work. I did quite a lot of work on social media analysis, and I have I'm just really interested in what if you're interested in any collaborations.
Thank you so much. That's the most important point that I normally emphasize. We absolutely all about collaboration. So that's why we're so excited to be a part of this campaign, but also further than that, we are very interested. So firstly, we share the social media listening research far and wide as much as possible. So I'll share it with everyone after this because it's really useful even for in-person dialogues. So for example, we are part of a SAPN, the Parenting Network, which is connected to the National Violence Prevention Forum. And there are incredible organizations there doing work around parenting. And obviously the single mother narrative is very problematic. So we've shared that insight with them so they can incorporate it into their dialogues around parenting. And then also further collaborations. If you have an idea or something that you're interested in collaborating on, please reach out to us. We'd love to pick up that conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll certainly reach out. Thank you so much, Manos.
Thank you. Just to expand for everybody who's on this platform today, and also people who have joined the coalition. are a resource. You know, it's like people have experience, but they're also a great resource. So if the whole idea is to bring the resources that we have together, the experience that we have together, the solutions that we are exploring, and sharing them so that none of us feel that we're starting this campaign from scratch. We're starting on the basis that work has been done, continues to be done, and what we're doing is leveraging it and spreading it far and wide. So, for example, this whole conversation that we've had this morning can be done with workers in a private company, or in the private sector. This work can be done in the public sector with men working in the public sector through the Department of Public Service and Administration, and positive masculinity, because the president chose that to be his theme for the G20. So there are a whole lot of other ways in which we are really creating a culture of sharing, because alone, nobody can do this work alone, or even with smaller groups. So we've really used our networks in the Violent Prevention Forum, everywhere, those of us who are doing full-time gender-based violence work, to enhance the knowledge base, but also to utilize it in a very constructive way. Yeah.
Thank you,
That's just
Nozipho.
what
I think we have a hand up from Robin Nimek.
Is that Talani?
Yeah, I can't.
Yes.
Hi, I can't find my hand
Talani.
button.
Please go ahead, Talani.
Thank you very much.
Robin first.
Hi,
Okay.
hi everyone. Really
Good
good.
morning, everyone.
Really good stuff.
Talani, just wait for Robin, please.
Oh,
She had her
sorry.
hand up. Okay, thank you. Go for it, Robin.
Thank you very much, Nozipho and team. This has been an insightful and very inspiring session. I'm Robin Nemak from an organization called Justice and Law Enforcement Impact. And I think more than a question, I've got a comment. Beyond the campaigning, we need to build the ecosystem that includes CPFs and SAPs, because some of these deviant behaviors are actually classified as crimes. Very often people don't find joy and peace at the end of a process because they are missing pieces of information. So while we have listening, social media listening, as a very critical tool in the conversation, I think these pieces or these insights or this data needs to be filtered down to those who enforce the law around these crimes. So I would definitely like to take the conversation forward from our organizational perspective and see how we can work together to reduce the deviant behavior and have a more healed and whole South Africa. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much for that. Okay. Talani?
Yes, hi everyone. I've just got two things that really came out for me. I thought it was great, and I really liked the way you talk about what's beneath the iceberg. I sort of frame that as joining the dots. I think any approach to this, we have to help people join the dots in the simplest way, which is why I also like your advert posing a question. One thing really jumped out at me, and I've never heard this word before, is body count. I find it strange because it almost perpetuates the violence. Do you know what I mean? Like, why are we describing a woman's partner's or sexual history as a body count? I find that, and we can explain that. I'm sure there's a reason, but it sounds violent, which is not good. It kind of perpetuates. The other thing is, at the end, you spoke about groups of allies then taking action. I'm curious what action you mean. What actually happens? And the other thing, of course, is just to emphasize or just agree with your point about language. You know, I don't think we can use research in this forum. We can use misogyny, but we can't use it out there. You really think about the percentage of people who understand that term. But yeah, I'm curious what action, because we always struggle like this with, I remember with Brothers for Life, stop. How do you intervene on social media without it becoming a spat? So I'm just curious about the action. Thanks.
Thanks so much. I was actually, when I was speaking, I was thinking about your very creative brain, like on all this data, and so I would love to also have more of a conversation around that. But very good point about the language and body count, and how what's also useful about the social media listening tool is it allows you to see the changes in the language that people are using, because there's new terms and new slangs, and so it allows you to really see this change. And I hadn't thought of it that way before, but yes, body count is also, if you a murderer, like what's the body count of this murder? So I think that's a very interesting perspective on that. And definitely around the languaging and getting people to reflect on these things, like it is actually, it has violence in that term. And then I just wanted to say about the taking action. So what we do is we're teaching men how to have dialogues with other men. So our whole intervention is around dialogue, having these conversations, and how do men have these conversations with other men. So if someone, and Jeffrey Mamputa and Stefan Snell, who will be part of the panel next week, they are very, very brilliant with this, along with Siabata, our other colleague who's here. But what do you say when a man makes a sexist joke around, when you're with your friends, or in the workplace, or online, or you're on a terrible WhatsApp group and, with all men, and someone makes a comment? So how do we have these conversations with other men to get them to reflect? So a misogynistic comment is one of the underlying causes of gender-based violence. So getting men at scale to have these conversations with other men, and also have conversations around healing. So taking that perspective that men who are hurting others, it's from their trauma and pain, and of course they're accountable for it, but having a male friend saying, you actually need help, this behavior isn't okay, you need to get help, things like that. And how we do it is firstly through sectorial engagement. So we've had amazing projects with taxi drivers, then with university students, but then also, and peer educators, community-based organizations. But then also, when we find these allies online, we make like bite-sized pieces of content of like, okay, this is how you can have a dialogue with your friend, and we actually send them. So they've of their own volition, like, spoken out on social media and said, I'm not okay with gender-based violence or misogyny. And then we send that, we say, we see you, we're behind you, and here's resources that you can use to take action and to make a difference in this space.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those questions and the response from you. Any other? We still have 10 minutes. Is it just an hour, isn't it, generally?
Yes.
Yes. So we still have 10 minutes, colleagues. Siki, is that another hand or is that an old hand?
That is a new hand,
It's a new hand. Please go ahead, yeah.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to explain what the body count is. The body count word is a word that's used a lot on social media. So I would suggest that, because what social media analysis allows, it allows for to be able to focus, or to kind of know which areas to focus on. And so I would suggest that there is perhaps like a messaging, a focused messaging group that can perhaps come together to look at the focus areas on what are the crisis points of language, and who also is speaking on these subjects, and how can we maybe even partner with creatives to communicate in ways that speak to those very specific subjects because body count is it's a very popular term, and that's being used without question. And it was actually quite brilliant what Yolani said about the other side of it is that people actually do die. There was a social media post that was written by another woman who's a writer, who spoke about the cultural roots of it, or just growing up and hearing these words of boys bragging about how many girls they've slept with and the shame that girls would grow up with, for example. And that's another level of, that's where it kind of, the socialization of boys. But I'm just saying, on a strategic kind of broader view of this campaign, for me, the value of having different experts is to come together and strategize and put those things together and come up with messaging and the how. And for me, the how is both on social media, it's a social media campaign, but it's also for me something that can be done on a local physical level on what it would look like in various sectors. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much for that, Siki. And we'll take up your proposal. And I think it's a very good, we need volunteers, people who are expert at different things to come together, because it's also a process of co-creation. Nobody has the answers to this. And so the idea is also that we will co-create and people will bring what they have to this table. But I see first Sita and then Michelle after that. Thank you, Sita.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm Sita. I'm calling from India, and it's been an excellent presentation. Thank you so much. Just looking at what we do in India, I was just wondering if I could understand the perspective, how y'all handle it in your country. This is related to 2 points. One, that normally when we work in GBV area, we talk a lot about how bystanders can play a major role, and whether the bystanders should be passive, active, or what exactly they should do. And there are certain situations where even if a bystander wants to be active, the circumstances do not allow that for various reasons, cultural reasons. And whether it's outside or even at home, a lot of times it's considered to be very private, and people will say that it is wrong, but they don't know what to do. So I was wondering, in terms of social media approaches, how do you handle the bystander approach? And the second one was related to non-binary, because GBV, I agree totally that the maximum is with women, but it happens with other gender, including men and young boys also at times. So I just wanted to understand, what is the perspective your campaign takes, or how do you all handle this in your programs? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sita, for that. I'll ask Michelle to go, and then I'll ask for Tales of Turning to respond. And then generally you can ask any of your other colleagues from Tales of Turn to respond.
Okay.
So thank you, Michelle. Your floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. Chair, I think this is such an important engagement for us to have, and let me be honest, I'm disappointed that there aren't more, because the work is so important. But the reality is also this time of the year there are so many competing priorities, and so. But I would encourage you and the team to maybe consider having another engagement in January. Because I think we need, specifically, I'm looking at it in our environment. The players, for me, is those important entry points to engage on this would be our municipalities. Many municipalities, of course, have a specific section dealing with the issues of women and men, and some of them, certainly in Nelson Mandela Bay Metro, where I live, I know there's a men's program, for example, and the special programs. But also, if we look at government departments who have a special programs unit, and because they have a captive audience that they engage with, but also in terms of a broader approach in looking at the different sectors of societies. And I think certainly for me in South Africa, you also have, and when I say religious, starting with Christians, Muslims, and really a broad section. But the importance for me also is to activate and because the information that was shared today was really, really important, especially thinking about young people and the use of social media and how people get dragged, young ladies, unfortunately, in terms of numbers, is in the majority, I think, when it comes to people being dragged on in terms of social media. But also, I think the issue of the language that I use, and for that, obviously, you need a multi-pronged approach. But the importance of engagement is, of course, key. I also do some work in higher education as a member of a governing council at higher education learning institutions of higher education. And I think the work at the institutions, as much as it is being done, needs to be intensified if we look at statistics currently. So my appeal to the organizers of today's event is that today's attendance is, for me, not a manifestation of people aren't interested. Maybe it's just their timing. But thank you very much for the work that you do. And I will certainly, I'm volunteering myself to assist in terms of mobilization for whatever follow-up programs you might have. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Yeah, Michelle Bardill is actually the deputy chair of council at Nelson Mandela University. So, and she's in Rebecca, and we know the situation is not so safe at the moment. But that's another point. Thank you, Michelle, and we will certainly take you up on your volunteerism. So I'll give it back to you then, Tales of Turning. The question, Sita's question on bystanders and passive and active circumstances, and as well as the non-binary issue. And then Michelle asking, what we can do to reach out to very specific constituencies or municipalities in particular. I know Tales of Turning, you were sponsored by the Violence Prevention Forum or whatever. Violence prevention in the city of Cape Town, right? So they're
Yes.
very supportive of the work that you're doing there. Okay, so I'll give it back to you, and then we'll ask Koketo to follow after that. Thank you then.
Thank you so much. So those are really wonderful questions and reflections. So very interestingly, so what we do is we train people to facilitate dialogue on social media. So to actually go, if there's a comment, women belong in the kitchen, or there's even been comments, women love violence, to actually engage in those using this methodology, which calms the conversation and deepens the conversation and gets people to reflect. What's very interesting is that a huge outcome we've seen is that it breaks the bystander effect. So when you have someone that's on public social media dialoguing in this way, other people come in and join the conversation. So it gives people the courage to speak out. Another thing that we teach is actually working in like groups. So often it's happened on a WhatsApp group where someone posts a toxic post, whether it's misogynistic or racist or homophobic. And if someone gets allies to back them up, so they post using this methodology, post a question or something to address that, they work in a team of other allies, come and use this methodology as well. And so that breaks the bystander effect. And it's very interesting how we've now done it at scale and in a lot of different contexts, how it really, really works. And it's also modeling this different way of engaging, instead of fighting and being polarizing, it deepens the conversation and it also neutralizes mis and disinformation and hate speech. And then around the point about both the LGBTQI plus community and violence against men and boys, I think those are absolutely vital points. So the intersectionality, both offline and then online in the data of what people in the LGBTQI plus community are facing is horrific, the intersectionality of the violence, and also the backlash in the coordinated networks to try and target the LGBTQI plus community. So that's very important. And then the levels of violence that men and boys are facing, that people even talking about their trauma online. So that's very much the perspective that we take, is that men and boys are exposed to high rates of violence, and there's that intergenerational trauma. So we are trying to disrupt that intergenerational trauma by encouraging men and boys to also reach out for healing and support in that. And definitely the stats of sexual abuse of boys. We also do child online safety work, and that's the stats are horrifying, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. And then the shame that the men carry, and shame is violence is also a way, again, people are absolutely accountable, but neuroscience, because I also do a lot with neuropsychology, neuroscience shows that violence is a way of warding off shame. And so these are all conversations that need to be had, because having these conversations helps disperse shame. So yes, it's a very good point. And then just around them, we actually run out of time now, but just one more point about the messaging. I think that's a great idea. So what we've done in the child online safety space is actually take the data from the social media listening research, or in that case, the other research that we did, and then have a brainstorming session where people are in breakout rooms, bringing their different expertise and perspectives, and then they talk about that data and develop messaging from it. So I think we have time for one more question, and then we can close off.
Koketo, I see your hand is up.
Yes, thank you so much, Ma'am Nozipho and colleagues. I think it's been quite an insightful conversation. I've been listening in. So I think there's a couple of thoughts that are coming to mind. One is about just the discussion around the body count, etc., and some of the harmful language, which I agree that we need to look for more constructive, positive language, attributed to women. But I think generally, a general comment that's not really tied to the previous point is that we've found that in the space, particularly the GBV technical space, there's in our attempt to find the right level of language, we end up doing what can normally be called linguistic camouflage, or the over sanitization of language, which then has an opposite effect, which means that at times it then creates a sense of desensitization or some sort of apathy, that there's no shock factors anymore around the issue, creating the right level of attention and urgency around the issue. So I think in as much as we need to balance the positive language that is not triggering or alienating or derogatory, we also need to be very conscious of also not over sanitizing some of the language and using simplistic language that people can be able to almost attribute to their own behavior and reflect upon. So that's one of my comments that I thought of sharing, but also to share that part of the activities that we are planning jointly as well with Ma'am Nozipho is that we on the 10th we would like to we are arranging an engagement specifically on the meaningful engagement of men, because in a lot of and I think when we speak about the targeting specific stakeholders within the ecosystem, we found that the way GBV communication has been framed to date has in some ways been quite alienating to the male audience. And I think having men, positive modeling men in the room as well, expressing their views and their contributions, and us challenging them instead of vilifying them, then becomes important. So on the 10th of December, just on the last day of 16 days, we're in fact planning, we'll share details in collaboration with Maiden Guardians. In fact, I was just on a call with them this morning, just finalizing the logistical details around that. And if you can, please tune in, because I think this then becomes a piece of a much bigger response that we're trying to build, that we need to now start becoming intentional with how we engage different segments of society, and in a way that is not blanketed, but also assigns a specific role for men to engage and to stay tuned in the fight against GBV, because we require a whole of society approach. So those are just the thoughts that I wanted to share. But just to say, it's very insightful inputs and data that you've shared from your end, colleagues from Tales of Turning. I think social media and the digital space is such a powerful way of being able to gauge what is the general, community perceptions, the trends, what's happening in people's minds. And it's helpful to also see although it may not be comfortable, but what is some of the harmful language that exists that we need to start challenging also in our messaging, in the way in which we approach, this campaign. So thank you so much. Very valuable learnings. Thanks.
Thanks so much. I think those are such important points that you made, and we're out of time. So,
Can I just make one little point?
Yes, I was going to ask you if you had any final words.
I was just thinking about this body count thing, because I don't want to lose the thought, is that whether we sanitize it or not, it's going to go into the English language lexicon, and it'll be in the dictionary at some stage, and it stays there in many ways, because that's how language evolves. But in the days of HIV and AIDS, the same concept was called promiscuity. It's a totally different word altogether. And so when we did the training, we used to say, okay, how many is that? How many, when does promiscuous become promiscuous? Is it after 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6? Ask that question. And people actually were quite baffled that they didn't know, whether it's after 10, after you've had sex with 10 people or 20 or 30. But still, it was a word that carried a concept about it's too many, wherever you were sitting. So I'm just thinking we shouldn't be, the language actually conveys the current culture. In that regard, we need to move with it and use it, of course, appropriately, without suggesting that it be abandoned or it be neutralized. It does sound horrific. I mean, I had never heard of it, but now I've learned a new word that I had absolutely no idea about. That is current in the social media space. So thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you so much, Tales of Turning. And I don't want to lose sight of the very, very important issue that Robin raised around the justice and law enforcement, because femicide is homicide, and it's a criminal act, and the laws say that it is. So I think we'll also create a group of people who look at the law and look at the criminal justice system. And we have our very own Bridget Mabandla also here. Bridget was an activist. She's our ambassador. She's very active in this space, part of the Beijing +30 group, and she's a very experienced lawyer in this area as well. So and Brenda as well. There are lots of lawyers in the group that can contribute to how we look at the message we send out about the criminal justice system, and how it needs to look at the justice issues of GBV and not so much the legal procedures, etc. of the law. We are in the end fighting for justice as well as ending GBV, because we don't need it in our societies. Thank you very, very much. And I look forward to seeing all of you next week on the 10th, when we have a panel of men who will be talking about how we work together as men and women to end GBV in our country, because we can't, the years of women driving it, women are still going to drive it because they always do. The victims always drive the fights for human rights and justice. Like Black people, are at the forefront of racism and ending racism. We're not going to see many white South Africans fighting for racism. And I think this is similar, that it is always going to be the women who drive it, but we can't do it without women in our society.
Thanks so much. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
Thank you very
Enjoy the
much.
rest of the
Have a good
day.
week. Have a good week. End of the week. And
Thank you.
see you next week. Thank you so
Bye.
Thank you so much.
much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.